How about your heroic willingness to encounter the unknown and articulate it and share that with people? So when I was an undergraduate at the University of Alberta, I had some success with women, but not much. And then I went to McGill and I was a graduate student, and nothing changed really in the couple of months between when I was a senior undergraduate in Alberta and when I was a low-level graduate student in Montreal. But how attractive women were to me changed a lot. And I thought, well, that's not you, that's something about status. And I already knew that the evolutionary theory there, and that women are more affected by, let's say, social status in relationship to sexual attractiveness than men are. But then I thought that through too, and I thought, no, women use status as a marker for the ability to gain status in novel environments. It's something like that. And so like an expensive watch or something like that, or a nice suit, shows that you have acquired resources and hints that you still could, even if things fell apart. So it's not mere power or even resources, which it's often parodied at and sometimes understood as. It's a proximal marker for something much deeper. So like if you look at human social hierarchies, and this is true across the animal kingdom, and then you rank order individuals in terms of their relative status, even in relatively non-social creatures that have to occupy the same territory, those that have the best local niches have offspring that are much more likely to survive. They have much lower mortality rates. And then there's something else too that psychologists have figured out that I think is right. It has a biological underpinning, which is that your serotonin system is more effective at modulating your negative emotion given a certain level of stress the higher you are up in the social hierarchy, because you're actually safer. And so part of what that implies, and this just blew me away when I sorted it out, was that when you go after someone's beliefs and they've used their beliefs to stake a claim to a position in a hierarchy, you're attacking the structure that modulates their sensitivity to negative emotion. And if you're hypersensitive to negative emotion, you hyper prepare physiologically so much that you die way earlier. So this isn't trivial. And it isn't like the terror management theorists think that your beliefs somehow regulate your anxiety directly. It's no. You have a set of beliefs that gives you a stake to a claim in a status hierarchy. And so that's what we do as professors, right? We say, well, look, we have this knowledge, and that's why we get this niche. Well, then I attack the validity of your knowledge, then I make you out to be one of those fly-in bowerbirds that just ripped off the status hierarchy, and then that interferes with your emotional regulation. That's that's worth thinking about for about 10 years, that. Partly what the woman is trying to do is use markers of proximal success as an indicator of niche switching capacity. Now, they're inadequate markers, and that's partly why they can be criticized, and they're no more accurate than the claim that just because you're rich, you're good. But status is not exactly wealth, although wealth is a proxy for status. Status is more subtle, but symbols of wealth are pretty good instantaneous proxies for status. Yeah, they're subject to all sorts of flaws and they're not sufficient, but you have to screen most people out, so you need simple markers to begin with. So imagine that there's a type of male who tends to win dominance hierarchy contests and to emerge at the top. Well, that's the case. That is the case. And that's why you're the way you are. And so what's happened among human beings, this is so cool, is that human females are choosy maters. So about twice as many men fail in their reproductive efforts as females fail. Okay, but the men who succeed are more successful. So women are on average more successful, and men are on average more failures and more successful. And I'm talking strictly about reproduction here, although it generalizes to other areas, but I'm talking about reproduction. So how does it work exactly? Well, the women have a real problem with mate selection. It's like, who the hell are you going to have as a mate? And it's too complex to work out. So women in their genius don't. They let the men compete and then they peel from the top. acting out the assumption that the man who wins is the best man. And it's a good assumption, because if you have a bunch of men competing, especially if they're competing across competitions, and someone pops up at the top, you can think, well, they may not be worth much, but they're better than anyone else at whatever it is that they're doing. And that makes men at the top of dominance hierarchies very attractive to women. And then the women accelerate that, so you can imagine they're more likely to reproduce. And so what happens is that the proclivity to emerge at the top of the set of dominance hierarchies becomes inbuilt into the biology across time. And the women exaggerate that by differentially allowing the men to reproduce. And that's also why they're Mother Nature. They really are Mother Nature. It's not just a metaphor. And so then the representation and the biology start to tangle together. And that's like, well, that's the difference between a meme and an archetype. Right? A meme is this idea that propagates itself, but an archetype is an idea that has propagated itself across such a massive span of time that it's actually shaped the course of evolution itself. And men, I can tell you already how this, it isn't necessarily that you even have to compete with other men in order to see who wins. As soon as you admire someone, and that'll happen unconsciously, you won't be able to stop yourself. You've already elevated them in the dominance hierarchy contest. The act of admiration is your recognition that you've met someone who's better at whatever it is that happens to be driving your admiration than you are. And so, and that's partly the manifestation of just the idea as the what would you say, as the representation of the ideal. Kids do that all the time. They hero worship other kids. Usually, like a 4-year-old will latch onto some 6-year-old who will just follow, or she'll follow everywhere and do exactly what they do. And it's like, well, why? Well, because that person represents to that child their next ideal, their conceptualization of the place forward. So our society, and this is the dominance hierarchy idea. Dominance hierarchies set themselves up as a matter of course. They're the standard way that animals organize themselves in a territory. Well, okay, human beings are watching those dominance hierarchies since we became self-aware, thinking, what the hell are we up to? What the hell are we up to? And there's a question that lurks in there. What constitutes acceptable power? What constitutes acceptable sovereignty? Who should lead? Who should rule? What should be at the top? Well, we talked about that. The Mesopotamians figured that out. Speech and vision, that's Marduk. Speech, vision, and the willingness to confront the terrible unknown. That's what should rule. Well, what? Is that an arbitrary idea, or is that a great idea? How could it be any other way? Well, so then you might say, well, what would you want to be king? You could say king of the world or king of your own soul. What do you want to subordinate yourself to? How about your heroic willingness to encounter the unknown and articulate it and share that with people?